Thank you. Morning, everyone. So as Eric said, my name is Sebastien. I'm a commuter on Apache Cloud Stack, member of the PMC, the Program Management Committee for Cloud Stack. Who here is an Apache commuter? Yay! So we're three. So next week, I know you're going to be in Denver. So we're going to Denver for Apache Code. So I'm going to talk about how we move from Publican-based documentation to read the docs. Okay. So the good stuff. No, that's not the good stuff. The right side. Okay. If you don't know what Cloud Stack is, it's in the same space as OpenStack that you may have heard of, OpenNebula in Spain, Eucalyptus. It's used to basically build clouds at the very low level of the data center. But that's not a talk on cloud. And what I wanted to start with is, the good stuff, like they said yesterday. So how do we move from this to this? Okay, so do you think, which one is better? This or this? Okay, so I mean, it may look like minor, cosmetic changes, but the problem, the major problem we're having is that at Apache, we're all about building community over code. And with this documentation, we had very little doc writers. So basically, there was one doc writer who was sponsored by Crucifix, who was contributing most of the documentation. And nobody in the community, even though we have roughly 1,000 people in the community, none of them were actually committing or writing new documentation. So that was the big issue, and we were wondering what's going on. On top of that, very little committers to the documentation. Building this was a real pain, and I'm going to show you some of the reasons why. So we moved to this. It looks better. I think the theme can even be enhanced, and then we need to do more work, but it's already a huge improvement. So nothing against Publican and what's beneath it, Dogcook. Red Hat is using it heavily for all their documentation. So if you go to all their product documentation, JBoss, and you name it, it's all Publican-based and Dogcook. And I think there might be folks from Red Hat here. Who's from Red Hat? Yeah, okay. So it's all Dogcook and Publican, which means that it's a good solution, but for us, we're kind of struggling. The reason why we started with Publican and Dogcook is because one of the guys, the main guys in Cloud Stack, was also one of the chair members of Fedora, the Fedora project, and they also use Publican and Dogcook. So if you look at this side, it looks a lot like this one. Okay. Some of the challenges that you see, we have multiple guides. Of course, they have multiple formats, and then we have each of those for the different releases, and then we also have translations. So it can be a little bit overwhelming. So that's not to say that Dogcook is bad. Okay, Dogcook is great because if you're also trying to write a book, and I know yesterday there were 3 hands of people writing books. OReilly actually wants their content in Dogcook or Word. Okay, and for us, Word is not going to happen. So if you want to write OReilly, you have to go with Dogcook. Okay, so it's a good it's a good solution. So Dogcook is great. Some guys from Pact Publishing asked me for a book the other day, and all their content, you have to submit everything in Word. So I told them that's not going to happen. What's funny is that all the documentation of Cloud Stack, the initial documentation came from Word. So it was a big chunk of Word, several hundred pages that we migrated to Dogcook and Publican, and now yet again we migrated to another format. So who knows? Maybe we're gonna try a 4th one. So Publican is basically a build system, for your documentation. You write everything in that Dogcook format, and then you use Publican to actually create the PDF, the HTML, and so on. And Dogcook is just basically XML schema. So I'm not going to bore you with XML, but if you're trying to write in XML, that's going to be a challenge. Okay, and that was the biggest hurdle for the guys trying to write documentation. They couldn't concentrate on actually writing. They actually had to learn the schema, first for Dogcook, and then come up with the content. Of course, there are editors, but we'll see some of the issues with that. So issues, we ended up with, I counted yesterday, 540 Dogcook files. okay? Because the way we structured the documentation, it was a totally flat structure, and you can break everything in small sections so that you can then compose guides and chapters and books and so on. So you start with a very flat structures of sections, and we end up with 440 XML files. That's a lot. That's 43,000 lines of XML for 400 pages of documentation. Okay, so that's a lot, and that's a lot, especially when the build breaks. Okay, so that one, that's just a break here, and that's an easy one. Somebody made a commit and they forgot a file. They forgot s3 ss add XML. Can I point with this? I mean, you get it, right? This one. So they forgot the file. So that one is easy to fix. They probably forgot it in the commit, but it can get much trickier when you have sections that are linked into sections and then nested and then nested and then nested again. And a couple months ago, we ran okay, last slide. We ran into a problem to build the last version of the documentation for the 4.2 release. And it took us 2 weeks to find the issue in the build of the documentation, because there was like a 6 level of nested loop in the XML. Okay, so that was just nonsense. The doc writer who's really should just be writing and not trying to debug XML build. She got really fed up. She almost quit. She was like, that's not for me. So we ended up fixing the build, but that was like, okay, that's Dogcook is a problem for us. The other problem was, there was an email on the mailing list where, somebody asked, okay, what are you guys using to write documentation? So first, very few people replied because we have very few doc writers because it's just too complicated. And then, I said VI. So imagine editing XML, 40,000 lines of XML with VI. That's going to be a challenge. And then the doc writer, she works on Windows, and then she said, oh, I use Oxygen. But Oxygen is $500, okay? So in the open source community, that's a no-go. That's not gonna happen. Your guys trying to contribute to the project, they're not gonna go and purchase a $500 editor. I mean, there may be some open source ones, but then they create problems in, indentation, white spaces, trailing white spaces, you name it. So, those are some of the issues. Other issues we had with Dogcook and Publican was translation. We have, I'll show you later, we have 80 translators that actually got very active on Transifex. And then you have to build the documentation, the translated documentation. And that stuff can also break, especially when you have Chinese, and then in the XML you may have like bad escape quotes and slashes and backslashes, and then it breaks and you're staring at XML files with Japanese strings in there, and you're trying to find what's going on. Okay, that's very difficult. Website hosting was also a problem, and then Publican is written in Perl. Okay, that little bit ancient, which makes it difficult also to install on OS X. So difficult. But the biggest one was that Publican Dogcook was just a turnoff for writers. So we wanted to make it easier for writers to contribute. So we decided, okay, let's convert them. Let's forget about that format and let's go and convert. Let's bite the bullet. So we converted. And then, of course, the question is, okay, what do you convert to? So all the developers, and I understand that there is a little bit of a separation between writers and then developers, but really, I'm of the opinion that developers should actually also write the documentation. Some people say that may not be a good idea, but the fact is that guys writing features, developing features, they are the ones who know that features best, and they should actually, go give a first path towards documenting it. So if you look at developers, of course they use GitHub very heavily, and if you look at the markup supported by GitHub, you get Markdown, ASCII doc, blah blah, and then you get Restructured Text, which is what we decided to use. So we could have decided to use any of those markups, but I'm also a contributor on Apache libcloud, which uses Read the Docs, and Read the Docs is a system to host documentation built using Restructured Text. So I said, okay, let me try to give it a go with Restructured Text. Okay, now I didn't know MakeDocs, so personally I use Markdown, for my blog and a lot of documentation that I write. So I may have chosen Markdown if I had known MakeDocs, okay? But we'll see where MakeDocs goes. And then, we could argue about this. We could have a little discussion on Restructured Text versus Markdown. Restructured Text is a little bit more complicated, I guess. The markup is more involved. But anyway, so we went to Restructured Text. And the reason with those markups is that if you look at the doc for Restructured Text, it is an easy to read. What you see is what you get, plain text markup system. And that's really the thing. If you're trying to read XML, that's not going to happen. Okay? If you're trying to read Markdown, raw Markdown source, yes, you can read it. So, that's really the basic. If we want to write Markdown, Restructured Text, very good ideas. And then I write Python, so all the build tools that are in Python, I'm happy with that. Now the problem, how do you go from all your content that's 40,000 lines of XML to Restructured Text? There is a wonderful tool called Panda, which was mentioned yesterday by somebody here. Maybe left, right here. Panda is just amazing. Look, it converts from input formats to output formats, you name it, Markdown, Dogcook. Yeah! LaTeX. Yes, there are some people who still write LaTeX. And then you can choose, EPUB, output, Markdown, Dogcook again. There's even docx. You can do Word, and then HTML. So Pandoc is great. So I started looking at using Pandoc, trying to automate conversion of all the files because we were not going to rewrite the entire documentation. So Pandoc really saved my life. And there was a little bit of an issue with Dogcook, the way all the documentation was organized. There's like so many nested loops. So that's problematic. So what I ended up doing is a very dirty little hack. So I built the entire documentation in a single HTML file, which is huge, and then I converted that. Okay, and it worked. That was great. Okay, so one build, one conversion, and I have all my documentation in Restructured Text. A little bit messed up. Okay, so you have to go through the gotchas, table of contents. You have to fix some of the headings that make it messed up, formatting of the table. You may have to go back and fix some of those. Code snippets, the Restructured Text markup may not be the right one. Dot colon versus versus blah blah. You may have to fix that, and then references throughout the documentation. So the conversion is not perfect, but you can convert and then start hosting, serving, and your documentation is live, and then you can go through fixing all those gotchas. So now that's one thing. You have converted the entire documentation. Now you need to build. You need to build it, and then you need to host it somewhere, like GitHub pages, whatever, like we've seen with MakeDocs. So the build, that's where Sphinx comes into play, that we've heard from Marcus. Sphinx is pretty cool. It could be cooler. It's kind of a little bit rough around the edges, I think. But it works. Install Sphinx. Sphinx quick starts. It creates that structure of make files and whatnot for your project. And then you can all those restructured text files that you created with that conversion, drop it in that structure, and then you have your quick start, your Sphinx built. Make HTML, bang, you're done. Okay, and you end up with this. That was pretty much the. No, that's not us. That's yours. Yeah. Sorry. So you end up with your HTML documentation, and I'll show you. So now you have your HTML, but you need to host it. So where do you host a Sphinx project? And use Restructured Text, read the docs. That's where libcloud is, and that's how I learned about read the docs, and I thought that was very cool. So we moved to read the docs. And the big issue with read the docs when I looked at it was that little button at the top right, edit on GitHub. And that's what we wanted to do to try to increase contribution to the documentation. We wanted people to read the docs, say, that's awful, the tone is very bad, let me change that. Edit on GitHub, click, raw, let me change that tone, let me add a but at the start of the sentence. Basically social coding, creating a community of doc writers to improve our documentation. and that was really the big thing. So that's the little snippet. That's the Japanese. I'll talk about the translation, but it's that magic button here. That's magic right there. How did you do yesterday? Magic. Edit on GitHub. Okay, that's great. It's more than this though, because in Apache, we're using Git, but then we're mirroring everything on GitHub. So there's a little bit of a time difference. But then once it's the mirror of the documentation is on GitHub, we can use service hooks so that it calls read the docs, and then read the docs is like, oh, there's a new commit, let me build that. And you can automate that. So we are very happy with an automated build on every commit. I haven't added basically a Travis CI, build and test. But we could do that to make sure that the build is actually going to work. Even though if the build fails on read the docs, it's just not going to serve the pages. So that's just a little chat here I had yesterday with Humbidoo. Humbidoo is one of the leading Apache infrastructure guy. He's great. He's always online. You get him on IRC, and I told him, hey, we have a missing hook here for the docs. I said, whoop, activated, and next commit. The build was redone, and the changes were on read the docs. So again, integration with GitHub is really, really key for us. And the end result, I have to look at the slide. That's bad. I should go by slides by heart. The end result is that we're starting to see drive-by contributions. That's great. Somebody reads the docs and like, oh, bad. Edit, submit, bang. So Pierre-Luc from Montreal. That's Patrick Miller. I have no idea where he is, who he is. There was a bug. Somebody submitted a mail to the list saying, oh, that stuff is wrong on the documentation. That other guy read it, and within 10 minutes it was fixed. That was unbelievable. And there was another thing the other day, like last week, I think there was one, a manager. I know he's a manager because I know the guy from B-Square, a company in Amsterdam. He gets me on IRC and he's like, hey, there is, the documentation looks nice, but this is wrong. This looks, bad. Like, yeah, I know, but that's the heading is right. Everything is right. It's just optics issue with the headings in Restructured Text, so it looks weird. And he fixed it. So that was great. We had a contribution on the documentation from the manager. That was great. Drive-by. So we love drive-bys. So we converted from Dogcook to Restructured Text. Now we're hosting on Read the Docs. We have seamless integration with GitHub. We are starting to see drive-bys. And now we have one last hurdle, which is translation. Okay? We have huge communities in China and Japan. And they like documentation in their own language. Okay? And they are very active in translation. So thank God Marcus exists, and Sphinx has localization support. So that's that talk we had yesterday with Sphinx Intel. How do you say it? I said Sphinx INTL. Okay. So I added a README. You can see my documentation style is very terse, or whatever the word. I like examples. Copy paste, bang bang. This is Transifex TX. I'll show you what that is. But basically, all that documentation, you upload it to Transifex, and then it's split in strings. And then the translators, they go to Transifex website, they see the strings, and they can translate sentence by sentence or word by word. Okay, so they don't have to translate like 500 pages. They can just, oh, I have 5 minutes free. Let me go translate 2 lines. Okay, done. Once there are translations, then you can pull them, and then you make a build. Okay, and then you have translations. So what we had is that we were already doing this with Dogcook and Publican because it works great with Publican translation. So we had lots of translations in Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Italian, you name it, and we were serving all that documentation. That's the main page for Crucifix. We haven't seen the demo. Maybe I should do a demo later on the quick talk. Lightning talk. But we had 83 people contributing translation. We had more people contributing translation than documentation. So Transifex was very, very good to us. So now the problem is that we have to start hosting a new site, which is the Read the Docs. version. And we have to hope that we can recover the already translated content. Otherwise, we're going to lose the work of 83 translators. We don't want that. So that's still a work in progress. But yesterday, thanks to Marcus and I forgot his name. Robert. Thank you, Robert. We managed to make our first build in Japanese. Okay, so I cut the page because that's the only thing that's translated in Japanese. But it looks good. There's just a little problem here. That's an artifact from Dogcook. But anyway, we're hosting Japanese page on Read the Docs. Cool. So conclusions, we changed format mainly because we wanted something that was easier to write and easier to contribute to. And restructured text you can write, that's made to write, not like XML. It's easy to contribute to because we have that nice GitHub integration with Read the Docs. We have localization support with Sphinx, automated build with the service hooks, remote hosting, we love it. And it renders very well on phones. So that's great too. Awesome. Almost done. I wanted to say something that next week there's the ApacheCon in Denver, but there's a huge rumor that ApacheCon Europe will be in Budapest. So if you guys want to come to Budapest, that should be in November. November, ApacheCon in Budapest, and we could have a little documentation track or whatever if you guys are interested. Okay? If you want to get involved with CloudStack and documentation, just grab me or look at the CloudStack website. docs.cloudstack.apache.org, because Read the Docs supports friendly URLs. So you can also check that out. I need to update that slide. docs.cloudstack.apache.org. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, and a friend of mine, web hoster, who's running CloudStack in production in Geneva, gave me those. They are 50 Swiss francs vouchers. So if you want to host Make the Docs, you can get a card and you'll host your website.
Cool. Any questions? No. I'm curious as to how you went about reusing the translated strings, as to how much work that required.
So I have an email. So yesterday, with Robert and Marcus, we looked at it, and Transifex has something that's called translation memory. So when you have all your projects, you can turn on sharing of strings between projects. But if you look at the docs a little bit more carefully, it says only with enterprise plan. That's what we didn't see yesterday. So I have we know the guys a little bit, and I send him an email, and so he's giving me a quote. No, but so that might work. I mean, if we have to pay for it, we'll see how we can make that happen. But that would be very much worth it because we have lots of translation. The problem is, when you go with the Dogcook that created basically PO files that have the strings. My question is it did it extract the same strings, then make get text from Sphinx? If it's not the same strings, it's gonna be.
Just to add on that, if Transifex also can find similar strings, so if there is, so if you have a string you have to translate, it presents you below strings that are similar, like 90% similar, 80% similar, and so forth. So this can even be useful in case of only a certain percentage of similarity.
How do you manage your process for accepting a contribution on GitHub? Like, do you have any ideas about that yet, or?
So when they edit, when they click edit on GitHub on Read the Docs, then it clones the documentation for them. Yeah. They send a pull request. automatically we see the email on the mailing list.
Yeah.
There was a pull request. You just review the pull request. You try that, if it builds, you try that if it's correct or whatever, and then you accept.
Okay. So you manage them one by one, or
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a manual. I mean, like any patches submitting to CloudStack source code, you look at the patch and then the committer is just going to apply.
I would like to know how Pandoc converts things like file name, class name, and all these constructs from Dogcook. Will everything done to code style, or?
I have no idea.
Things like role?
No, in the documentation we had very little. I mean, we didn't have huge code snippets, or we didn't have. It was not API docs. Our API doc is separate. So the only thing that we had in there were like bash lines, maybe a few Python scripts, things like this. I did go through the converted results, and I checked all the code snippets, and some of them I had to put like literal includes and things like this.
One remark: there's an author version of Oxygen which only costs, I think, 150 euros.
All right, so I think that was the last question. Maybe you guys can talk after. So thank you. Thank you.